There is breaking news from the trial of Tom Girardi. This is Predator in Plain Sight, exposing Tom Girardi. I'm Chris Hansen with co-host Kimberly Archie, noted legal consultant and former Girardi Keese employee. And we're joined in this episode by Nancy Marston, who is a former Girardi Keese client, author of the book The Serpent's Tooth, and she is also an addiction specialist expert. And she has been in the courtroom for the entire trial over the last 2 weeks. Kimberly, Nancy, thanks for joining.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Big news today, Kimberly. Let's start with you. Tom Girardi, in a bit of a bombshell, took the stand in his own defense. I can't believe his defense lawyers thought this was a good idea. Did he do this against the advice of counsel?
Yeah, he definitely went against counsel. And of course, he's the client. In a situation like this, he gets the final word. So if he wants to testify, his lawyers can't stand in the way. They can only advise him whether to or whether not to. And so he definitely went against his lawyer's advice. And, I thought that his lawyers would be able to reason with him for some reason, because it's just so risky. But at the end of the day, it doesn't surprise me because he's a narcissist. He has a huge ego. He's been playing a role all these years to some degree. And now this is his last great hurrah in the courtroom. And how can he let it go to a close without being the center of attention?
His lawyers have argued all along that Girardi suffers from dementia and had no idea what was going on financially at the firm, that he never stole client money. And they seem to blame Chris Kamen, who is the financial officer of the firm, who is going to face criminal charges in a separate trial. And yet today, he is able to get on the stand and at least make his case that, according to him, all the clients got paid.
Yeah. So one of his quotes was, "I swear to you, every client got every penny they were supposed to get." And of course, we heard from Joe and Kathy Rogomez, Judy Selberg, Josie Hernandez, Erica Saldana, that that's not true. We heard from Ryan Roberson, the IRS investigator who went through the books and showed how the money went in and how it went out and how they spent it on things other than giving it to the clients. So the jury has seen that that statement is doesn't ring true.
Nancy Marston, you were in the courtroom. Cameras were not, because this is a federal trial and no recording is allowed. Take me inside. Tom Girardi shuffles up to the witness stand. How does he look? What was your impression?
Well, first, before even he went up there, they did go round and round, and they looked extremely nervous about him, pretty much insisting that he go. I know they advised against it. They took a break and sidebar and all kinds of things to I'm sure, talk him out of it. And he was determined. He was edgy this morning. One of the first things I saw, that he was very agitated. He was moving in between, getting up and moving in between his attorneys and talking to them. And then they'd tell him to sit down, and he would stand and get in and kind of flail a little bit with his hands. And I've never seen him even talk to them, to tell you the truth, not even whisper to them. He's motionless, and he just looks around the room crazy and dazed. And so he did go on the stand. We came back from a break, and they said, we're going to call the defendant. And he walked up there, and when he was being sworn in, he shook his hand in kind of like this dramatic way, like, he's going to show them. And so he kind of stumbled up the steps and sat in the this witness chair and started to answer questions. Most he did not tell the truth about. He's denied everything. He said one thing after another. It was everything that was the truth. From the fact that he doesn't have a firm anymore and doesn't have a office and he says he's going to his office and he still is open.
Do you think he was putting on an act by saying the firm is still open, even though it's been closed since 2020? He still goes to his office when he's been living in an extended care facility for dementia patients. Was this an act or was it believable? And how did the jury react to this, Nancy?
The jury looked a little stunned. Um, he addressed them several times and they I think the whole courtroom looked a little stunned. I was stunned until I was in tears when he was blaming people for his crimes, and that broke me into tears. But I think that that it wasn't believable in that so much has been brought out, and the jury has got a lot of information, and it doesn't say anything that he said. So
At
in other
one
words, from being still being in business and still, that he was protecting people and he never stole a penny and, um, he did that usual thing. I'm a good guy and don't be mean to me. Little rant that he does sometimes. So that was kind of weird.
At one point, his lawyer asked Girardi if Girardi knew the lawyer's name. And Girardi said he didn't, and then went on to say, I don't know, bad, mean, terrible. It's one of those.
That
That
was at
was
the
odd.
yeah, it was at the very, very end when he said, because he asked him, he goes, "Well, do you know me?" And he said no. And then when he went off the stand, um, I think that was on redirect because he went off the stand and his lawyer like kind of soothed him and rubbed his back, kind of took him over and escorted him over towards his chair. And he looks, it's got to, I mean, the jury's watching all that too. And it's like, it's got to be an act because one minute he's going to testify and the next minute he doesn't know where he is. Does that make sense? What I'm saying is like, I mean,
No, it's a strange dichotomy that you're
yeah,
watching in the courtroom. And the one minute he's trying to convince the jury, and the prosecution under cross-examination brings this up and essentially says, as a defense lawyer, you made a living persuading people
yeah.
to believe you. And the question was asked, is this what you're doing here today in front of this jury? And his answer seemed to indicate that, in fact, he was. We'll see. It was
And
a
that,
telling moment, wasn't it, Nancy?
yes. And that attorney said to him, well, you must be a really good attorney. And Tom Girardi said, thank you. And then he looked over with a big smile on his face at the jury. So like he said, some of his questions, he said he'd get asked questions and he would say things like, well, I'm not ready to cross yet, which was like, what, yeah, like he didn't, suddenly he didn't know that he was on the witness stand.
Do you think he could have been actually confused, or do you think this was again part of an act here?
There was times I thought he was confused, but then thinking back on it all, looking through what I wrote and my notes, I think it's an act. I do think he's a little not there. But how did he go from, they showed him a video of him in 2020 and he didn't recognize himself. He said he didn't, well, that's a good looking guy. It does look a little like me. And it's the one where he's talking about that attorney has to persuade and, that's what a good lawyer would do. And he's pretended, I think, that he didn't recognize himself. And, that the act of persuasion is what, a lawyer would do. It was very strange to keep track of it. I can't imagine what the jury was thinking.
Did this come off as a surprise, or were there whispers, Nancy, that he was going to take the stand in court today?
The first I heard, and I was trying to remember yesterday when we were leaving, I believe that's when there was something about the defendant testifying, but I thought, that won't happen. And then this morning there was the way he was behaving and they were talking to him, and I'd never seen that through the last 2 weeks. That's when I started to think. And then when we went on break, it was like we knew. And they said they want to speak to their client. And they took, 10, 15 minutes. And right when we came back in, this is the morning break, right when we came back in, they put him on the stand.
Kimberly, do you think this was a vanity play? Or do you think that, you've worked with Tom Girardi, you've prepared cases with him, you've investigated some of his earlier cases. Do you think deep down he really thought he was going to help himself by doing this?
I just think he's a narcissist and needs to be the center of attention. I mean, I know Tom very well. He was a mentor. I watched his every move. When everyone else was drinking at parties and conferences and all that kind of stuff, I was being a student. I wanted to learn everything I possibly could from Tom because he's a master. He's a master of persuasion. He's a master manipulator. He's a master at getting people to do what he wants. And, he's motivated by people thinking he is a great guy. That's why he's known for saying, be nice to me, because he hated it when people would come at him in a negative way or not be nice to him, just to cut to the chase. I mean, that was his bottom line. Everyone has an intrinsic motivation in life. There's one hardcore thing that motivates each one of us. And Tom's was to be the belle of the ball. The last time I ever talked to Tom, he said, I feel like, somebody who, like the kid who didn't get asked to the prom, the person who's left out, who's this, you know, down and out kind of guy. And, during his comings and goings, from the courtroom throughout the trial, you can see that sometimes he would smile outside when he saw a lot of cameras. When there were no cameras around, he would just walk do. In the beginning, during the competency hearings, when he would come in and out, they would act like he couldn't walk by himself. Now he walks fine. They don't hold him or anything. He just walks out of the courthouse. They just walk next to him. I mean, to me, from knowing Tom, it's all an act, and it's infuriating. It's infuriating because basically, he's spitting on the graves of the dead people that he was supposed to be representing. He's spitting in the face of Joe Rogomez. How dare he say that he didn't give a client their money because they supposedly had a drug addiction, when number one, even if they did, that's no reason to keep their money. You don't have any right to keep their money. Number one, maybe they need the money to go to rehab. But Joe Rogomez did not have a drug addiction problem. Joe was burned on 90% of his body, third-degree burns, and the inside of his lungs were also burnt in the fire. He was in a medically induced coma for months. He was hospitalized until from September, when the explosion happened, to early January of 2011. And by September of 2011, his pain management doctor, who also specialized in addiction, had him admitted to the hospital to be transitioned from the medication they put him on to Suboxone. So he followed his doctor's orders the entire time, and he took Suboxone until February of 2022. And most doctors will keep you on it and just maintain you on Suboxone for whoever knows how long. Joe actually got himself off Suboxone. Anyone who's listening to me right now that has a family member who has seen this personally knows it is excruciatingly painful to get off Suboxone. And the amount of strength that he had to do that shows you who Joe Rogomez really is. And Tom wishes he could be half the man that Joe is today.
And yet, when Girardi was asked on the stand by his lawyer if he remembered trial testimony from some of the specific witnesses, including some people who worked with him for decades, Girardi said he didn't remember their testimony. And he's including there the testimony of Joe Rogomez, to which you refer.
Yeah, and he did, he did remember, he was able to make comments about some people. Like they asked him about David Lira, his son-in-law. He said he was the greatest guy, wonderful. When asked about Shirlene, he didn't remember her testimony, but he said that, quote, she was the greatest person of all time. When asked about Alexa Galloway, who we heard was the attorney that testified on Judy Selberg's case, he said she, worked for the firm. When they asked him about me, he said, it was right after Alexa. He said, oh, the same thing, that I worked there. I haven't been in the courtroom because I've been on the witness list the entire time. So I've been locked out of the courtroom this entire time. So the fact that he could remember who I am and that I was the same as Alexa, it's just interesting that he has this very selective memory. And I think he thinks that he can fool a jury. And that's oftentimes what lawyers think, they're smarter than everybody else. And I'm the opposite. I think everyday people are just as smart. Life experience is a part of being an intelligent, and the jury is not a young jury. They have life experiences. We have a cop and a teacher on this jury, and I think that they'll get it right.
Nancy, you are an addiction expert, an addiction specialist. When you hear Tom Girardi's defense, when you hear Tom Girardi's defense lawyers suggest that Girardi withheld settlement payments to his clients because they were addicted, what goes through your mind?
I was infuriated. I was super upset because one of the things that in my line of business, um, being an addiction counselor for over 30 years, I cannot stand to see somebody blame an addict. And he basically said, the reason I'm protecting the addict because he can't protect himself. He's not capable of, he kept saying that Joe was only 18, and I'm now hearing that he was really 21 when this was going down. So he didn't get the age right, but he blamed it on keeping the money, and that Kathy, Joe's mother, asked him to do it, which I knew was all a lie. And I knew that and I hoped at that point that the jury was also hearing that and going, wait a minute, that's not right. He also said in front of, to go back to the testimony, he said he didn't know a lot of people, but he also said that he wasn't his exact words, I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't see the testimony. But then he went and talked all about Rogomez and their situation, and seemed to know quite a bit about that particular case. The other ones, he said, I don't know. There were 40 attorneys and at my firm, and I did not know who these cases were linked to. All the others he didn't know much about. And he also said he did not hear any of their testimony, which is insulting because he was right there when Joe was there and Kathy was there. And yet he went on and on about it and said that he wasn't in the courtroom.
It seems like he may have selective and convenient dementia.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, isn't that what Dr. Darby, who was a rebuttal witness yesterday for the prosecution, said, all of Tom's symptoms have very convenient timing to come into play as soon as the law firm imploded. And one of the things that I have found just, heartbreaking, just, still being a human, but also, shaking my head, is that Tom is under a conservatorship. Where's his conservator? If he's really just this old guy that everyone took advantage, where is his family? Where is his conservator, which is his brother, who's a dentist? It was said not one person from Tom's family came one single day to court to support him in any way, shape, or form. If that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what does.
None, Kimberly. No friends, no relatives, no daughters. No one has been there. No one. And all the attorneys that have testified have all testified against him. Even when they were called from the other side, they've all testified very negatively toward him.
There was, after this drama unfolded, another witness brought to the stand by the prosecution. Kimberly, tell me about that.
So Mr. Isaacs testified. He was a rebuttal witness for the prosecution as well. And he represented former Girardi Keys clients. I believe it was 28 of them in a case called Prim Pro. And they didn't receive all their settlement monies. Mr. Isaacs, a former prosecutor for the Department of Justice. So he knows a little bit about this stuff. And he was able to force Tom through this legal proceedings to show his bank records. He was held, in contempt of court. He had really serious problems during this litigation because Tom would not cooperate and give over the records. And so, he was forced to do that, and he was forced to pay these clients back. And so I think he was a really strong rebuttal witness to see an attorney get up there and say, "Hey, I'm a former prosecutor. I represented these clients in 2015, which would have been far too long ago to try to say that Tom had been senile enough." We really didn't hear, even from the choir of Tom's, misfit crew that he could bring in to try to say that he, was starting to be forgetful. We don't really hear much until his car wreck in 2017. So this is 2 years before the car wreck.
Well, this testimony is critical because, as you said, it's 2 years before the car wreck, before there was any indication that Girardi would plead some sort of dementia. And he lost this case and had to pay the clients. And the question begs, where was any sort of sanction from the state of California on a guy who was tampering with trust accounts of clients? I mean, that is a very serious charge for a lawyer to face. And for him to have faced these charges for so many years and to not even get a warning or a sanction or anything like that, that's rather shocking, Kimberly.
Yeah, I think that's the key point that I hope people will take away from this trial, because obviously Tom's disbarred. So whatever the verdict is, he's not practicing law anymore. But who propped up Tom Girardi? Who were the people and the entities that propped him up? And what about all of the people we've heard about during the trial, like Chris May and his son-in-law David Lira and Keith Griffin and Robert Finnerty, whose names came up over and over and over again throughout the trial for their own misdeeds? When are we going to see them be held to the standard that a lawyer should be held to?
You bring up David Lira. Nancy Marston, you retained David Lira, or he worked on a case for you when he was with Girardi Keys involving a family dispute over lottery winnings.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, the money that the law firm got, their fee from the settlement, ended up going to Lira's wife and to Erica Jane, who was then Tom Girardi's wife. Now, that might be legal that, a lawyer who gets a fee for winning a settlement, typically a third, could assign that money to their spouse. But it's got to irk you a little bit now that you see this looking back with hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, they were attorneys' fees assigned to non-attorneys, which is, yeah. And the bar knows, and David knows that it wasn't right, because we confronted him immediately on that issue. And he said it was an estate, something about estate planning or something, which I don't understand. I didn't even understand that, because David's pretty much, doesn't fall too far from the tree of Tom Girardi when it comes to being unethical. Yeah, it does irk me. I mean, it's disgusting in itself that's where it went. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars too. It was a large amount of money, and it's still being paid out to them. I don't think to Erica. I think they froze it or something. They did something with it. But a judge signed off on it, which he probably shouldn't have. But I think, and I've talked about this with several people, is that I think that Girardi Keys did a lot of things, and I use the firm name, but a lot of the attorneys did a lot of things like that with different cases. It wasn't all the trust and stealing. They just manipulated a lot of cases. And mine was a perfect example of, giving there's more to it. I talk about the whole case in my book, and the things that were odd, which I finished writing that book in 2015, so I didn't know any of this. It's
it was a little prescient looking back.
Yeah, it's like
check out the book. It's The Serpent's Tooth, and you can get it on Amazon by Nancy Marston. So check it out. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today. Kimberly, we go to closing arguments on Monday, and this case could go to the jury. The jury has already gotten its instructions from the judge in the case, and we can see this case go to the jury on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, I think that, they said closing arguments would be about 90 minutes for the prosecution and 90 minutes to 2 hours for the defense. So I do think this will go to the jury, after lunch sometime. And, maybe we'll get a verdict if, we don't know where they're at with this, or perhaps, they'll have to come back on Tuesday. I think they'll be diligent in going through and making sure they're following the judge's instructions. And there was a lot of testimony. So I'm sure they're going to want to try to get it right.
Well, the first rule of predicting what a jury will do is never predict what a jury will do.
I know. Well, I love doing it. Everyone knows that, and I'm pretty damn good at it. But we'll see. That way, it's kind of like the ocean or a wild horse. You sort of
Yeah.
ride the wave, but it's like penny stocks, and that's part of the fun of being in the legal profession is being able to try to predict a jury, and that was one of the fun things about working with Tom, is that he was so good at persuading a jury, and that at the end of the day, that's the key to being a plaintiff's attorney. Is a lot of stuff goes to the wayside. The bottom line is, can you persuade the jury to think like you think? And I think that Tom finally met his match in this trial, and I just don't think the jury's going to see it his way.
Having covered hundreds of trials over the years, I can give you one predictor, and that is if the jury comes in after at least a day or a half a day of deliberating and they're dressed to the nines, they're dressed up, you can pretty much predict that a verdict is coming that day. So Nancy, we'll be looking to you for a full fashion report at some point on Monday afternoon.
I will be there.
All right. Nancy, thank you. Kimberly Archie, thank you as always for co-hosting here. We will continue our coverage and take you inside the closing arguments and ultimately the verdict. We will have the very latest from the courtroom. For Kimberly Archie, I'm Chris Hansen.